On a dark night, long after the great flood was meant to wash the world clean, a curse was born. A curse so potent, so spiritually twisted, that it would contaminate a bloodline for 1,000 years and end with a divine command for total annihilation. This wasn't just a story of war. It was the story of a spiritual virus that God Himself had to eradicate. But this ancient horror holds a secret key for us today. It explains why some forms of evil seem so deep, so generational, so unstoppable. It reveals what happens when a society turns its back on God, and why God's judgment, though it may seem harsh, is actually an act of profound mercy. It all started not on a battlefield, but in a moment of family shame. You know the story. Noah, the righteous man chosen by God to save humanity, emerges from the ark. He plants a vineyard, a symbol of new life and promise. But in a moment of weakness, he drinks too much wine and falls asleep, exposed and vulnerable in his tent. And it is here, in this quiet, private moment, that his son Ham commits an act so vile, it fractures the future. The Bible simply says Ham saw the nakedness of his father. But this phrase in ancient Hebrew means something far more sinister than a glance. It carries the weight of deep dishonor, mockery, and violation. Scholars have debated for centuries what truly happened in that tent. Some believe Ham mocked his father, celebrating his weakness. Others suggest a far darker physical violation. Whatever the specifics, it was an act of profound rebellion. It was a strike against the very man God had anointed to restart the world. It was a celebration of chaos over order, of darkness over light. And when Noah awoke and understood what his youngest son had done, a curse was spoken. But notice who he curses. He doesn't curse Ham directly. He looks past Ham and speaks a curse upon Ham's son, Canaan. Why? Why punish the child for the father's sin? Because what Ham did wasn't just a mistake. It was the planting of a corrupted seed. A spiritual mutation was introduced into his bloodline, a legacy of rebellion and darkness that would be passed down. And in Canaan, that seed found fertile ground. From that single moment of defiance, an entire civilization would grow, a civilization so morally decayed, so spiritually bankrupt, that God would later have to issue the most terrifying command in Scripture. This wasn't about land or politics. It was about a spiritual cancer. The Canaanites, descendants of this cursed line, would become infamous throughout the ancient world. Their very culture was built on a foundation of darkness. They didn't just worship idols, they built their society around practices that would make your soul shudder. Imagine this. On the high places, on the beautiful mountains of the Promised Land, they built altars, but not for prayer, for slaughter. At the heart of Canaanite religion was the god Molech, a monstrous deity with an insatiable appetite for the most innocent of victims, children. Archaeologists have uncovered the remains. Parents, with their own hands, would place their newborn infants onto the burning hot arms of a bronze statue of Molech, sacrificing them in fire. To ensure the ritual was not interrupted by human compassion, priests would beat drums loudly, a thunderous rhythm designed to drown out the screams of the dying child and the cries of the mother. They didn't just kill, they made it an act of worship. And the darkness went deeper. Their temples were centers of ritual prostitution. Men, women, and even children were forced into sexual slavery, their bodies offered up in rituals to appease gods of fertility and war. Every part of their society, their laws, their festivals, their economy, was intertwined with bloodshed, sexual deviancy, and the worship of demonic powers. The land itself was groaning under the weight of their sin. But here is where we see the incredible heart of God. This judgment did not come suddenly. God is not an angry tyrant looking for an excuse to punish. He is a patient father. In fact, centuries before Israel ever reached the promised land, God spoke to Abraham in Genesis chapter 15. He promised Abraham this land, but said, "Your descendants will return here in the fourth generation, for the sin of the Amorites is not yet complete." Think about what that means. God gave them 400 years, 4 centuries, generation after generation he waited. He gave them time to turn. He sent warnings. He watched as the cup of their iniquity filled, drop by drop, hoping they would stop. But they didn't. They dug deeper into the darkness. Their sin wasn't just a private matter. It became their public identity. By the time Joshua and the Israelites stood at the banks of the Jordan River, the cup had overflowed. The spiritual disease had infected every layer of their culture, from the government to the family unit. The land itself was sick and needed to be cleansed. This is why the command was so absolute. When God said, "Do not spare even the children," it wasn't because the children themselves were guilty of these horrific acts. It was because the cultural sickness was so pervasive, so deeply embedded in their upbringing, that to spare them would be to condemn them to repeat the same cycle of horror. It was a tragic, divine surgery to stop a terminal disease from spreading any further. If a single root of this poison tree was left, it would simply grow back, choking out the new life God wanted to plant. And this leads us to one of the most misunderstood parts of the Bible. The command sounds like genocide: destroy everything that breathes. Many people read this and walk away thinking, how could a loving God command such a thing? But we have to understand the language of the time. In the ancient Near East, phrases like utterly destroy or leave no one alive were common military language. It was wartime hyperbole, a way of saying achieve total victory. We even use similar language today. When a sports team wins by a huge margin, we say they absolutely destroyed their opponent. We don't mean they literally killed them. We mean they achieved complete dominance. The Bible itself shows us this wasn't a literal extermination of every single person. In Joshua chapter 10, it says the Israelites wiped out their enemies, but in the very next verses, it mentions that survivors fled to fortified cities. How can there be survivors if everyone was wiped out? Because the language meant defeated in battle, not every single person hunted down and killed. And here is the most beautiful proof of God's heart in the midst of this judgment. Even within this command, God made room for mercy for anyone who turned to him. Think of Rahab, a Canaanite prostitute from the city of Jericho. She was part of this corrupt culture, but she chose to fear the God of Israel. She chose faith over fear. And what happened? She and her entire family were saved. She wasn't just spared. She was welcomed into the community of Israel and is even listed in the lineage of Jesus Christ. Think of the Gibeonites, another Canaanite people. They heard of Israel's God and through a clever deception made a peace treaty. Even though they were Canaanites destined for judgment, their act of seeking peace was honored. They were absorbed into Israel. Do you see the pattern? This was never about ethnicity or race. It was about allegiance. It was never about blind rage. It was a targeted surgical judgment against a demonic system of worship that was destroying human souls. God's wrath was aimed at the sin, but his arms were always open to the sinner who repented, no matter who they were. It was a quarantine to protect the spiritual health of the world, and even in a quarantine, the doctors are always trying to save whoever they can. But here is the chilling warning for us today. The spirit of Canaan did not die on those ancient battlefields. It is alive and well in the 21st century. The names of the gods have changed, but the demons behind them have not. The spirit of Molech that demanded child sacrifice is still at work. It may not be a bronze statue anymore, but it thrives in the shadows of human trafficking, in the exploitation of the innocent, in the silent holocaust of abortion, and in any system that treats children as commodities to be used and discarded. The spirit of the fertility gods, which fueled the ritual prostitution in Canaanite temples, now fuels the hypersexualized culture we see all around us. Our screens have become our new temples, where the human body is worshipped and devalued at the same time, and where our worth is defined by our physical appeal rather than our creation in the image of God. When a society begins to call evil good and good evil, when it celebrates what God calls an abomination, when it mocks truth and glorifies pride, that is not progress. That is a regression. It is a slow, subtle return to the spirit of Canaan. The altars look different, but the sacrifices are the same. We sacrifice our innocence, our families, our integrity, and our connection to God for the temporary pleasures and idols of this world. Jesus gave us a stark warning. He said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." And the days of Noah, the days that birthed the curse of Ham, were days of unrestrained evil. We are living in a time where the echoes of Canaan are getting louder and louder. But here is the glorious hope. The same God who commanded Israel to fight that darkness with a sword now calls you and me to fight it with a different weapon, light. You are not called to hate people. You are called to expose darkness. You are not called to physical warfare. You are called to be a beacon of truth, love, and holiness in a world that is losing its way. The story of the Canaanites is not just a grim piece of ancient history. It is a loving warning from our Father. It shows us the devastating endpoint of sin, but it also reveals the incredible patience and mercy of God. And it issues a call to every believer: do not be deceived. Do not compromise. Stand firm in the light, because the darkness is real, but our God is greater. Your life, lived in faithfulness to Him, is a direct assault on the spirit of Canaan. And in this battle, through the power of Jesus Christ, we are guaranteed the final victory.